Kamlesh, should I begin now?
Yes, sir. Begin, please. Please go ahead.
Is Professor Krishna unmuted?
Sir, he can unmute himself.
Okay. Sir, should we begin now?
Yes, sir.
Sir, please unmute yourself. Professor Krishna, please unmute yourself, sir. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we begin now. Very good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be back every Sunday at 11 o'clock with the Indore study circle. And you have today our speaker, a very familiar face of the Indore circle, Professor P. Krishna. He hardly needs an introduction, so I'll rather straight away go to the program. And in case somebody is not fully aware about Professor Krishna, please visit his website, pkrishna.org. You'll get all the details about his writings and his background and so on. Professor Krishna is going to talk to us today about a theme, the future is now. And I'm again very, very happy, and I want to express the thankfulness on behalf of all the Indore group that Professor Krishna agreed for this talk. With these words, may I request Professor Krishna to, sir, please go ahead and begin your talk.
Thank you, Dubeyji. This title, Future is Now, is the title of one of Krishnaji's books. And this expression, which was used by him in one of his talks, I think during the discussion in Ending of Time, is like a Mahavakya. Mahavakya are phrases or sentences which condense a lot of the teaching into a short phrase, or like, you are the world, or truth is a pathless land, or the world problem is not separate from the individual problem, and statements like that. This can be considered to be Mahavakyas. The Mahavakya is not to be taken literally, because literally if you say the future is now, it sounds absurd. So you have to investigate it, that what does this phrase mean? What did he mean by saying this? And that's what I'm going to do in this talk. See, our life has two parts. One is the material part, which is the whole universe, nature, our body, and so on. And the other is the inner world of our consciousness, or psyche as we call it. Now, so far as this external world is concerned, the future is not now, because there is a time development, a development with time. And scientists tell us that the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago with a big bang, which is an assumption. But with that assumption, they are able to explain many, many developments and facts. So they believe that that assumption is likely to be true. So the material development has an evolution. Science studies that. Also, the biological evolution is studied by scientists, biologists, and that's also a fact, that the RNA and DNA structures mutate and produce new species and so on. And scientists find that there is a tremendous order out there in the material world, which is called the cosmic order. And it's governed by certain laws which the scientists try to determine. So if one knows the present situation, and one knows the forces that are operating and the laws which determine those forces, then one can predict the future of the material evolution. It is on that basis that the entire development of the universe has been determined by scientists. They know what happened 1 billion years ago, 2 billion years ago, and so on. And they have had experimental evidence to confirm all that. So time, chronological time is a fact. We measure it by any periodic motion. Now the earth goes around the sun in a regular way, and we call that a year. Take that as an year. And the earth rotates around its axis, and we take that as a day and divide that into 24 hours. So time is measured by this process. Even clocks, the pendulum repeats its motion, and so you can use that to measure time. And that time interval is measured in this way. There is one great mystery there, that all the laws of physics and all the equations that govern those laws, you can change time, which is written as small t, into minus t, and they still hold. So there is this mysterious question in front of scientists about the direction of time. Why does time move forwards and not backwards? In fact, Einstein pointed out that if you could move with a velocity larger than that of light, then time would start moving backwards. You would get younger instead of getting older, and so on. One other question which is not very clear is that if all the positions of the atoms are where they are now, and the forces are known and the laws are known, then it means everything in future should be predetermined. It is true for the material world, but does that mean that there is no such thing as choice or will? Is it already predestined whether I will give this talk or stop giving it? Or I have a certain amount of free will to decide that? So what is free will? This is greatly disputed by scientists because it seems to be in the area of consciousness. Consciousness exercises choices, and in that inner world, Krishnaji mentioned that there is no evolution. There is no psychological evolution, which means that though biological evolution and physical material evolution is a fact, the evolution in consciousness with time is not a fact. We need to examine that because our experience is that in life we make plans, we join a course, we study hard, work, and we achieve and get the result of the examination, get a degree, and so on. So we build a house in that way, we make a garden in that way, and time helps us in all this. You have to use time, you have to use implements, techniques, expert advice, and you achieve the end. So that is an experience we have of our daily life and achievements. We tend to carry that into the world of the psyche. And we think that gradually I can get rid of my anger or my violence or my sorrow. And Krishnaji is saying it's not like that. In this field of psyche, in consciousness, time does not help you. Therefore, psychologically, he says there has been no evolution at the level of consciousness. There may have been and has been evolution or development at the level of manifestation of what is going on in our consciousness. For example, wars were fought with bows and arrows and so on, but now they are fought with planes and nuclear bombs and so on. So in that sense, there has been a change. But it's not the change at the level of consciousness. At the level of consciousness, there was division then, there was hatred then, there were tribes which fought with each other, and those tribes are now national groups and religious groups, and we are still fighting wars. After maybe 3,000 years of history, we have never known a period when we were not divided at war. So there has been no evolution at the level of consciousness. That's what he is saying. And therefore you cannot rely on time to bring about a gradual change. You don't get rid of 25% of your anger and then 50% of your anger and then 75% and then finally become free from that anger. Because there is a certain causation within the consciousness, within the psyche, and unless that causation is uprooted, it functions. You will not get rid of with time. You can contain it, you can contain its manifestation, but it will continue to exist. Because so long as the cause is there, the effect will be there. Similarly, about crime, about violence, it has always been there with us. The implements have changed because science has produced more rifles and more weapons of destruction and so on than what were there for the primitive man. And so the manifestation level has changed. Now with one, you hear frequently a man goes into a school or something and kills 20 people with one gun. Earlier he couldn't kill 20 people with one gun. That kind of change is there in society. But at the level of consciousness, Krishnaji is talking that there is no change with time. The change comes with understanding. Understanding means when you perceive what is true and what is false at a deep level so that the false ends. So we have to understand this. Why is there no psychological evolution? Because psychological change does not occur through suppression or through escapes or through intellectual reading, expertise, learning techniques, and so on. It does not change. Your consciousness does not transform with knowledge, nor does it transform through will by your control. So how does transformation of consciousness take place? That process is free of time. In time does not help you to come upon transformation of consciousness. And it is our consciousness that manifests in our relationships, and millions of such relationships constitute society. So there are aspects of our society which never have changed. You find the same problems of desire, of jealousy, of anger, of attachment, of fear, of sorrow. All these psychological disorders have continued to remain with human beings. So in that sense, we have not evolved. And if we don't transform, it will continue like this in future. In that sense, the future is now. So when he says the future is now, he's saying if you don't change now, you will be the same inwardly in your consciousness tomorrow and 1,000 tomorrows. You can add, because time doesn't bring about change. Time doesn't bring about wisdom. If it did, all old people should be wise. That's not an observed fact. Most old people are quite arrogant, dogmatic, prejudiced, cynical, and so on. So just passage of time, acquiring age does not bring wisdom. White hair doesn't bring wisdom. That's the difference between the material development and the psychological development. So how does one grow in wisdom? We know how we grow in knowledge. We have all gone through school, college, experiences, and so on. All that is stored as conditioning. That conditioning undergoes change. You can do propaganda and convert a man from his capitalist philosophy to his socialist philosophy. Or you can convert him from Hindu religion to Muslim religion, and so on. It's a superficial change. At the level of consciousness, it's the same person. He does not change inwardly. Communists tried that. They thought that by changing the outer circumstances, like creating equality in money and property and so on, and controlling society tightly so that there is very little crime and so on, you can change man. Because there is a connection between the inner world and the outer world. It's not completely independent. After all, whatever goes on in the outer world, the child sees all that and gets conditioned by that. And that becomes his inner world. And the inner world then maintains the outer world. So the Indian child grows up seeing casteism being practiced in society, people not marrying outside their caste and so on. And that to him becomes a fact, and that becomes his conditioning. So casteism infects his mind, and that means he practices that. And so it continues in society. So the outer becomes the inner, and the inner maintains the outer. Kind of inertia goes on in society. So the communists thought that by changing the outer, we can bring about change in the inner. And that has been disproved. For 70 years in communist Russia, there was very tight control with a heavy hand. But when that control was removed, and they opened up society, they found that man had not changed. It was the same. He still wanted to go to churches and temples and pray. He was still afraid and therefore wanted to believe in God or something like that. So the inner transformation doesn't come about through any kind of external factors. So what is this understanding which brings about change? Last week we heard Gautama speak about understanding. And he pointed out that understanding has various levels. First of all, there is just the understanding of the words of communication. If you use a word with a meaning that is different from what meaning I give to it, it creates a misunderstanding between you and me. So at that level, if we clarify the meaning of the word, we say, yes, now I understand what you are saying. That's just a verbal understanding. The other level he pointed out was that you understand the logic of arguments which he is giving, and you agree with them, and therefore with his conclusion. So we say, yes, now I understand that mathematical theorem or the law in physics and so on, because you have explained to me the process behind it, the logic behind it. So it becomes a logical conclusion in the mind. That's another level of understanding. But deeper than that is this level which has to be attained through insight. Insight is freedom from the known. It's outside the conditioning. Your thinking is from the conditioning, and therefore whatever new construct you make out of thought is still part of conditioning. All major great discoveries have been made by people, individuals going past the known and picking up something from the unknown and bringing it into the field of the known. That's what we call as an insight. It occurs in all fields. It occurs in science, it occurs in art, in music. New forms of music have been evolved. New discoveries in science have been made, not inventions. Inventions are just putting two and two together and making four. They are still using thought. But I'm talking about major shifts of paradigm. There is a very good book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, who it was his PhD thesis. He says there that for a long time, people believed in the assumptions and the paradigm of the classical physics. Then there came relativity. Now, it was brought into being by Einstein. Einstein was trained in classical physics. In his experience, he never saw space and time interact with each other or mix with each other, because that happens when you move with velocities comparable with that of light, and you don't experience that in your life. So how did he come upon the discovery that space and time are not independent of each other, which was complete revolution in physics? It brought the equation E is equal to mc square, energies and mass are interchangeable. It brought the conclusion that velocity of light is the ultimate velocity with which energy or a particle can travel. That as a particle travels faster and faster, its mass increases. All these were completely new, and they followed from that one discovery of Einstein. It changed the entire worldview, it changed the paradigm. And yet, it still had causation within it. Then in the 1920s, there came quantum mechanics. That was another great shift in paradigm. That at the level of elementary particles like electrons and so on, the same causes don't produce the same effect. I mean, we have all calculated at the high school or intermediate or BSc level questions like you shoot a gun at a certain angle, a bullet at a certain velocity, how far will it go and where will it fall? And will it clear a wall that is there, which is 10 feet high or something like that? We have all done those kind of sums. It was all deterministic. But then they found that if instead of bullets, which are heavy items, you shoot electrons, very light particles, then they don't fall at the same place. Even though they start at the same velocity, go in the same direction, they don't end up at the same place. There is a spread. So determinism was broken down at the level of elementary particles. You don't experience that because you experience that in electron microscope or in experiments with the Hadron Collider and things like that. But in daily life, because we always deal with masses which are large, like stones or cars or things like that, even today, classical physics is used for calculating how a rocket will go to the Mars and so on. You have to take relativity into account, but not quantum mechanics. There is no uncertainty. That's how they travel to Mars and they make the plane land there and everything because they calculate that. But determinism, even at the level of the material particles, now does not hold. There is the uncertainty principle, which has been made into a law. So I'm saying that even in the material world, at the level of elementary particles, the future is not completely determined. Now that connects with this question about the inner world, that do we have choice? Do we have a will? Because if everything is determined by laws and forces, then everything is determined. So it's also determined when I will end this talk. Predetermined according to that. But it is not. We know that I can end it now or in 10 minutes or in half an hour. So we have a certain leeway which science does not understand because they don't understand what consciousness is. They use consciousness to do their experiments, but their science cannot explain what they are using. So that's a big mystery. And Roger Penrose, who got the Nobel Prize last year, I think, or this year, last year, he has written books to say that you can never generate awareness out of a configuration of atoms. Scientific belief is that matter is primary and that everything life, consciousness, everything is a epiphenomenon, a property that arises from that matter when that matter comes into a particular combination or things like that. In other words, just as you can combine hydrogen and chlorine atoms and get hydrochloric acid, which has very different properties. In the same way, they are saying if you put atoms together in a particular way, it will have life. They have not been able to do it, but that's what their belief is. Not all scientists agree with that. And the religious people have said that consciousness is primary and is always associated with the matter. It's independent. It's not caused, created by the matter. So the matter in the brain, namely the neurons, they generate the thoughts, but they don't generate awareness or consciousness. So there are profound questions both in the material world and in the inner world of our consciousness. But what Krishnaji is talking about is psychological transformation, which means the ending of disorder as all the negative emotions in our consciousness. What in Hinduism and Buddhism was called moksha or liberation and so on. In fact, Vivekananda said that that's the only main purpose of religion, is to free the consciousness of all these negative emotions. If you read his book, What is Religion? That's what he points out there. So it has been a known fact, but the common man has confused religion with rituals and belief and so on. But there has been this long legacy of religious inquiry. And Krishnaji is coming from that legacy of religious inquiry. To him, the religious mind is a mind in quest of truth. And what we know is not truth. Therefore, you have to posit it as the unknown, which means you need to go beyond the known to discover it. So this inquiry into what is true and what is false is what is called self-knowledge. And if you can have deep insight in this inquiry, then the false ends. I have on my screen a question and answer. Krishnaji was asked, what is transformation? And he gave that answer. I'll try to share my screen with you. And if I'm not able to do that, I'll just read it out to you. Are you able to see it?
No, sir. Not yet.
All right, I'll read it. The questioner asks, is there such a thing as transformation? What is it to be transformed? And Krishna says, when you are observing, seeing the dirt on the road, seeing how politicians behave, seeing your own attitude towards your wife, your children, and so on. Transformation is there. Of course, he is talking of seeing at a very deep level. Do you understand? To bring out about some kind of order in daily life, that is transformation. Not through will and through your effort and so on, but through perception. Not something extraordinary out of this world. When one is not thinking clearly, rationally, be aware of that and change it, break it. That is transformation. If you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower. Change it immediately. That is transformation. When you are greedy, violent, ambitious, trying to become some kind of holy man, see how it is creating a world of tremendous uselessness. I don't know if you are aware of this. Competition is destroying the world. The world is becoming more and more competitive, more and more aggressive. And if you change it immediately, that is transformation. And if you go very much deeper into the problem, if you go very much deeper into the problem, it's clear that thought denies love. Therefore, one has to find out whether there is an end to thought, an end to time. Not philosophize over it and discuss it, but find out. Truly, that is transformation. And if you go into it very deeply, transformation means never a thought of becoming, comparing. It is being absolutely nothing. Now one can say that, isn't this development? I would say yes, you are growing in wisdom. Whenever you end one illusion, you are a little wiser because that illusion was creating some disorder in your consciousness, and you are free of that disorder now in consciousness. But there is not just one illusion, and every illusion needs an insight to end. Because you can't get rid of 25% of the illusion and then 50% of the illusion. Either the illusion is there or it is not there. Time does not help you in freeing yourself of illusion. The ultimate illusion is, of course, the illusion of the ego, of being a separate self and so on, which lies very, very deep. We all feel that we are separate human beings. And the sages have pointed out that that is not true. The other man is yourself. You don't see that because you are identified with your body and your religion and so on, your beliefs, your conditioning, which is what is the ego. So this change, let me go back to the normal screen. I don't know now, how do I get back to the normal screen?
So it's all right. We can see you perfectly well. There's no problem.
You can see me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is not what Krishnaji said, but this is what my experience is and what my investigation says. That you begin from where you are. Where you are, maybe anger, maybe jealousy, maybe discrimination, maybe casteism, maybe all kinds of conditioning which is there, which is creating all kinds of disorder in your consciousness. That is what is. And Krishna is saying, look at what is. Understand it. Go beyond it. And in this passage which I have just read, he's pointing out that there is not one illusion. There are many illusions in our conditioning. Now, suppose you very clearly understand that comparing oneself with another is a disease of the mind. And it ends. You no longer compare yourself with others. Then you're free from envy, from jealousy, from hierarchy, from inferiority, from superiority, and so on. And yet you're not completely free of habit, of attachment, and so on. So that is the change, actual change in consciousness. You are now relating with people differently from what you were doing earlier. I would call that as a change, as wisdom. It's not moksha, it is not total freedom, what Krishna talks about. So my experience says, don't make total freedom the aim of this investigation of self-knowledge. Just begin. When you put enlightenment or moksha as the aim, it turns into desire, into ambition, and all the problems of desire will arise. And the desire is the essence of the ego. So the ego will be maintained. So don't approach like that. Approach with a learning mind. Learning not in order to achieve anything, learning just for the sake of learning, for the love of it, as we say. Then wherever that takes you, wherever that learning mind, which is, according to Krishna ji, that is the religious mind, wherever that takes you, don't make a destination of it. Because the moment you make a destination, you will start comparing that I have freed myself of this, but I still don't have that, and so on. And you will get back into frustration, and it is impossible, and I must give up, and all that. Don't approach it like that. When you don't approach it like that, you approach it with a learning mind, you're already free of the ego. So I like to point out in the form of a metaphor, because sometimes metaphors are good ways of communicating what one is saying. That the ego is like the root of a big banyan tree. And one of the branches of the tree is fear, another is sorrow, third one is desire, fourth one is violence, hatred, and so on. So there are different branches which are different manifestations of the ego process. At a particular time, one of these branches manifests in our consciousness, not all of them. And we are troubled by it, and therefore we think we need to get rid of that trouble. When you approach it like that, you're not approaching it with a learning mind. So Krishnaji is saying, treat it as an opportunity to learn about yourself. When you experience jealousy, when you experience greed, when you experience violence, anger, treat it as an opportunity to learn about yourself. Watch from where does it arise, and watch deeply. There is a place for inquiry too, because you must stay with the question long enough to have an insight and not come to a conclusion and say, I have understood. If you come to a conclusion and you say you have understood, your inquiry ends before you have had the insight. So that blocks the insight. That's why he says, don't memorize it. Next time you are looking at that, don't come from the memory of the previous occasion. Why does he say that? Because if you keep that memory and you store it, that becomes the known, And if you are looking at it through the known, you are looking through your conditioning. And the whole attempt is to go beyond the conditioning and perceive what is true. It's not within the conditioning that truth does not lie within your conditioning. It lies beyond. What lies within the conditioning are all these illusions and so on. So that is the difficulty of this psychological transformation. So future is now in the sense, so long as I am approaching life in the same way, there is no transformation. But if I go from a knowing, acquiring mind to a learning mind, there is already a transformation because you're now not approaching what is egoistically. And that's freedom from the ego. But it means that you have to be free from the desire to get rid of the discomfort, the disturbance which that negative emotion creates in you, and use it as an opportunity to observe and learn about yourself. When you have such a passion for learning about yourself, then it is possible to come upon this transformation. And how far you will be able to go, nobody can predict, not even you. Because there is no fixed path to be traversed. Every insight is a pathless perception. So in that sense, so long as we are continuing to be with the ego, whether the ego is attached to noble ideas or attached to ignoble ideas, it is still the ego, and it will produce all these complications. We have been told that you must have noble desires, not ignoble desires. And Krishnaji is pointing out, no, desire itself is a problem, not the object of desire. Desire, if you approach life with desire, it will have certain consequences. Either it will be fulfilled or it will not be fulfilled. If it is fulfilled, you will feel pride and the ego will be strengthened. If it is not fulfilled, you will feel frustration and sorrow. Until another desire is born and that energizes you. So you have to find an energy which is not born of desire, which means you are not seeking an end result. And that is exactly what the Gita said too, that your concern is with action, not with the fruits of the action. If you are doing the action with the fruits of the action in your mind, it becomes egoistic. But when you are doing that action for the love of it, because that's the right thing to do, then it's not egoistic. So it's very subtle. This freedom is very subtle, and we destroy it ourselves. The barriers are all within our own consciousness, because the ego does not exist anywhere in nature, neither in the animal, nor in the plant, nor in the newborn child. It exists only in our consciousness, and we create it by the way we approach life. So long as you are approaching with ego and with desire and so on, there is no transformation, and therefore the future is now. Psychologically and even materially, because in the sense, you will never get rid of war. You will never get rid of crime, because all those are manifestations of the ego. You may control it, but you won't get rid of it. In that sense, the future is now. It means that time does not help you to evolve. The evolution is a byproduct of deep understanding and insight. Thank you. I think I'll end it here. That's what I have understood from this Mahavakya called future is now.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. I think you have covered the entire landscape of teachings and explained so beautifully. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
We have questions. We can take questions now. I think Harshji has raised his hand. So, sir, unmute yourself. Unmute. And then we'll take Tarun Kumarji. Then Dineshji. Unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Nice to see you. Are you here in India, or are you at the other end of the world?
I'm able to hear you. I'm also able to see you. I'm not seeing all the others.
Okay.
I'm not distracted.
Anyway, the question I wanted to put is, I think the
Yes.
central thing that you're saying is that Krishnaji tells us that this transformation of consciousness does not happen in time. So we shouldn't be looking for it to happen gradually, bit by evolution. Now, when he says that, how am I to take it? I'm listening to this. Do I accept it as fact? It may be fact for him, but until I have an insight into this myself, I can't take it for granted. So
Right.
how do I listen to a statement like this? That's the question. Because there is a strong tendency I see to accept, especially when Krishnaji is saying something. There's a strong tendency because we are used to accepting authority, and we quote other people. We can say, I don't know, the Buddha also said that desire is the source, but are we accepting? This is the question I have. Are we accepting authority, or are we inquiring for ourselves whether
Yeah,
what
well,
is the truth
all
of this?
of us, Harsh, has to look into oneself, because you may be saying I'm not accepting, and still certainly you may be accepting. So one has to understand this whole question of authority. It's not that somebody becomes an authority because he talks about it loudly and asserts and so on. It is that in this inquiry, authority has no significance. In the inquiry of knowledge, authority has. Einstein is a great authority, and I can learn from him in that field because he is an authority in that field. It is not like that here. Krishnaji himself is also not an authority. And he repeatedly said so, that please don't accept what I say. Investigate it. Investigate it through observing your consciousness in daily life. Connect it with daily life and watch and come upon the truth, not the interpretation of the truth which your mind is giving from the words that he is expressing. Because we think that somebody else is interpreting. No, your own mind also interprets the meaning of Krishnaji's words when he reads Krishnaji, when you read Krishnaji's book or listen to his talk. So you have to doubt your own interpretation also, which means that if you have understood, taken the question from him, don't take the answer from him. It has no value for you. And explore the question in your own right, in your own life, daily life. And maybe you come upon that same observation or perception which he came upon, and which he, from where he is trying to point out to you. Unless we come upon that same perception, you don't have the truth. You only have the idea of the truth which Krishnaji saw, you have not seen. And so he has repeatedly said this. But I think most people think he's saying this out of politeness. I think he is honest and factual. He has seen the truth of the fact that authority, whether of the masters or of the living guru or the dead guru, any authority has no significance. The authority can only give you an idea of the truth. Going from the idea to the perception of the truth, that is the pathless bit. And that's the work one has to do. But the point I was making, which Krishna is that there is not one illusion. When you start inquiring, you will come up with some of the more superficial illusions will come up first. And the deeper illusions you may not be able to break through. So don't be content with where you have got. Continue this inquiry wherever that takes you. To my mind, if you don't make a destination and you just continue with this inquiry as self-knowledge, he has acknowledged that self-knowledge is a process. It's a process in time. Because as he said in that passage which I read out to you, but elsewhere he talks about, like the banyan tree, that you have cut one branch. Now, if you are content with that because the disturbance has ended in your consciousness, you have not gone to the root. And the ego is still there. And therefore, there are other manifestations of disorder which are taking place in your consciousness. So when it manifests, don't be satisfied with just ending the particular discomfort of that manifestation, like fear or sorrow. It is ultimately connected to the root. And so go to the root, and there is an opportunity to uproot the root itself. Now that requires a much deeper level of understanding or holistic perception of the connection of that whole field with the root. And you may not come upon it. But whatever you come upon, if you come upon ending the religious bigotry, I personally feel that's a change. If you come upon ending of casteism and domination over man over woman and so on, so many cruelties, and yeah, there is a change, but you are not completely free. You still have disorder in your consciousness. So don't stop there. Continue with the learning. That is what I have taken from his teaching. It may not be exactly what he meant. Nobody knows what he exactly meant. And he is not there anymore. So you have to do this inquiry and find out for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Mr. Tarun Kumar, yes, please go ahead.
Sir, namaskar.
Namaskar.
It has been told earlier while the beginning of the lecture that there were evolutions as far as the matter field or the biological field is concerned. But it has been said that there is no such concept like evolution. It is only discovery. And that is also true for recognized and approved common knowledge banks. Any physical law or chemical reaction in controlled parameters was since ever. It is not evolution. It is only the matter of having knowledge of that and making means to make it execute. So please, this is the first thing which I would like that you can throw some light over this. Secondly, that the transformation so-called is not beyond the existence of the individual consciousness. It is the stay and satisfaction of one individual consciousness with his own existence. Rather, illusion is the encroachment of an individual consciousness in terms of controlling and operating the outer events and things. Please, sir.
As far as I know, biological evolution has tremendous favor, and the entire scientific world accepts that biological evolution has actually taken place. That starting from amoeba and paramecium, and then how the plants developed and how reptiles came and how the brain developed further, and all this origin of species and so on. You have to read what Darwin's work, and then other people have improved upon Darwin's theory. But essentially, Darwin's theory is correct. That's what they think. So biological evolution, I think, is a fact. We did evolve out of the monkey over millions of years. But Krishnaji's remark applies to psychological evolution. He's saying there is no such thing as psychological evolution. There is, of course, ending of an illusion. But there is gradual in the illusion. It is so I would say that every time you have a deep perception, wisdom grows from perception to perception, not like knowledge continuously. It's a discontinuous process. In terms of physics, I would say it's like a quantum process. The quantum transition takes place in time, but does not take time. It is not off time. It occurs, the electron goes from one orbit, disappears, and appears in another orbit. It doesn't travel from there to there over time. It's something like that that Krishnaji is talking about. And he talked about it as mutation. That means there is actually the brain cells change inside the brain through this insight which you have.
Thank you, sir. I think we can take Dinesh Ji's question. Mr. Dinesh Apare.
Sir, I was also about to ask the question which already Mr. Harsh Shankar has asked. Many other people, you said that time, Krishnaji said that time is not important factor, or it is not involved in the psychological evolution. But many other people, you have taken the name of Vivekananda. He has also he said that with the time this evolution can take place. So please throw some light on this, because many other people have said that time is the time also the psychological evolution can take place.
Whenever you find that two great people have said different things about something, you have to find out on what basis do you choose between what X said or what Y said. So you have to find out. You have to just take it as a question and find out for yourself. Unless you find out for yourself, you have nothing by way of truth. You have two contradictory opinions, which are all there as part of knowledge. So insight is to perceive what the truth is. The truth is beyond opinions. So you don't reach there by collecting a lot of opinions. None of the opinions is truth.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dakshinamurthy, you have a question, please ask.
Yeah. Good morning, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
My question is like this. Krishnaji has talked about all time being in the now, the past, the present, and the future. All three are contained in the eternal now. And also, he said, you are creating your future, but by what you are doing now. What you do now will decide your future. So the future is in the now. That is my understanding. Can you elaborate on this and throw some light?
Yes. You see, ego is continuity of the conditioning. And the conditioning comes from the past, your experiences, your knowledge, all that produces the conditioning. So the past is there in the consciousness in the form of the conditioning. Now this conditioning and your attachment to it continues into the future, and the future is therefore determined by this conditioning. I took the example of war, for example. So the hatred between, the division between communities and the suspicion and lack of friendliness between the communities is responsible for the division and the hatred. So unless that changes, unless you see the other man as yourself and don't separate yourself and don't suspect him and all that, unless there is a transformation in the way you relate with that person, this will continue into the future. Now, whether it will manifest as war or not, that is a question of manifestation. That is, you have this problem between Hindus and Muslims in India. It has been there for centuries and it is still continuing. Sometimes it erupts into big violence and so on. At other times, it is not violence, but the division is still there. Psychological division is still there. So in that sense, there is continuity, and the future, you are only changing the manifestation in the future, and you have no control over that because circumstances will determine when a storm comes. So if I may again give a sort of metaphor, if each one of us is violent in our consciousness, has violence in our consciousness, we create a whole sea of violence. In that sea of violence, there is a storm, sometimes in Kashmir, sometimes in the Middle East, sometimes in Los Angeles, and so on. And you get a lot of killing and so on. And we think that the people there were responsible. And Krishna ji is saying, no, all of you are responsible for the state of the world. This is an interesting thing to investigate. There is an interesting question and answer which happened in early February 1948. Krishnaji was giving a talk in Bombay, and Gandhi had just been killed on January 30. So on February 1st or 2nd, he was giving the talk, and at the end of the talk, somebody asked him, sir, who was responsible for the killing of Gandhi? And he said, each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion, on the basis of nationality, is responsible for that killing. Now, normally we consider that Godse was responsible. So what does he mean by saying all of us are responsible? I have given thought to this. After all, Godse was not born a murderer. He was born like a human child without an ego. Then he got conditioned growing up in this society, getting educated in this society. Who has created that society? People like you and I. We have created this society in which there is all this religious division and everything. The child got infected by this, and out of that infection, he developed the hatred and he killed Gandhi. So aren't all of us responsible for creating? But we think only Godse was responsible. So he is giving a much deeper significance. He's saying you are the world. If anything happens in the world anywhere, all of us are responsible for it. But we separate ourselves and we think those people are responsible and we are not responsible. And he is pointing out that is a way of escaping the truth from the truth. The truth is that all of us are responsible for the state of our society. So he's talking something very deep, that the whole of human consciousness is responsible and each one of us is contributing to it. Unless we step out of the ego field. If we step out of the ego field, then you are no longer contributing. Otherwise, you are contributing, somebody contributing very violently, somebody contributing less violently. But everybody is contributing to the confusion and the chaos in the world.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
We have another question coming from George. Please go ahead. George.
Good morning, Krishna ji and everyone. And I have a little bit confusion here when you explained about transformation and you brought into the word is insight. And you said the moment you see anger, jealousy, you end it immediately. And in some other context, I also understand that K once said that don't interfere with it. Let it flower and wither on its own. Whatever interference you do, it will strengthen that. That is one point. Another thing is when you said that when you see the anger or jealousy.
Excuse me, I find it difficult to hold 3-4 questions together in the mind. So let me answer this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an important point. I've already lost it. Can you repeat it? The first point which you made.
Yeah, that is, you said use the insight. Insight means act immediately. When anger comes, you end it immediately.
Yes.
In another context, K said that you allow it to flower and wither on its own.
Yes, sir. Let me understand. See, when you say allow it to flower, it means you are not trying to suppress it. It does not mean you are not observing it. Now, in order to observe it, you will have to let it flower. You will have to stay with that question as to from where does this state arise in me? That's the question with which you are exploring and observing. And in that, a deep insight may occur that it is arising because I am comparing or I am disliking somebody and so on, so on. Or I have an idea that other people should suit me. And so you will need to question that attitude which you have, from which it arises. Now, in order to study any phenomenon, you have to watch that phenomenon. If you interfere with that phenomenon, you are trying to end it. You can't study it. So don't make that goal of ending it. Just make the goal the understanding of that phenomenon. To understand a phenomenon, you have to watch it attentively, what it is, which of course it is painful. So you will have to put up with the pain. We do put up. I mean, when you learn music and so on, you put up with a lot of pain. You don't easily learn and get it. So in the same way, this learning will involve a certain amount of perseverance and pain included. If you are all the time seeking comfort, you can't come upon this learning. So that's how I understand him.
Okay, in continuation with that, I would like to point out that you said that insight, when you see anger, jealousy. So when you say that when you see anger and jealousy, you are already have named it. That is, you already recognize it. Recognition comes through memory, time. So insight is out of time. It comes not from time. So in that context, what we are missing here, what I feel is, we have to see without the word. The moment you see with the word, then you are back into the game of time. Then there is no insight at all. Can you highlight on something?
Yes. What you are saying is true, but you can't do that voluntarily. You can't decide that I will not let the word come, because it doesn't take your permission to come. It just comes. So you have to observe whatever happens, not put conditions on what must happen, must not happen. And that's an important aspect of his teaching, where he said that virtue cannot be practiced. So you cannot derive out of Krishnamurti's teaching a new kind of virtue to be practiced, namely looking at something without the word. And therefore you're trying to look without the word. No, you are the problem. The I is the problem, which is trying to do all this. So don't bring in the I. The pure
Yes.
observation or awareness doesn't have ego in it. It is just watching something. But it's
Yeah,
not
watching.
an empty watching. It's not an
Yeah,
empty
without motive. That's what it means.
in your mind. The inquiry.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. My computer is saying that my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, that's what I can't get the audible continuously. Thank you.
Okay, I'll change my internet connection. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are.
No?
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah. So I've changed my connection. Now go ahead. Next question.
Anandji, can you ask your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, you already replied, but I'm rephrasing the question, sir. Sir, I'm happy. I have a great relationship with my family, with my neighbors. I'm quite content in life. Whenever it is required, I do help, through charity or whatever it is. Now, the question is, what is my responsibility when it comes to the killings which are taking place across the globe, sir? So many people are murdered. So many people are dying out of hunger. All this is happening. But how do I look at this, sir? I'm happy. I'm content. I cause no problem to anyone.
Yeah, according to Krishnaji, that's an illusion that we are not causing any problem to anyone. Because so long as the ego is operating in our consciousness, you may not be aware of it, but it is affecting all your relationships, including your wife and children and your ideas and colleagues in the office, everywhere. So somewhere more, sometimes less. So we are measuring by the manifestation, and he is talking at the level of consciousness, not at the level of manifestation. So what we have been brought up to think is that it is important to change the manifestation. And he is saying, no, go to the root of it and change the consciousness itself. And that is what is transformation. The rest is like social work. I mean, there is no objection to do social work, but you do social work, it will change the situation a little bit, but it won't alter that situation because there are deep-rooted causes behind that situation. So you can give alms to the poor. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think that that will eliminate poverty in the world, you are in an illusion. It won't illusion. But there's nothing wrong with you give alms to a beggar or to a poor man in order to help him because you love to do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the
Then I don't see that as my ego, isn't it, sir? The ego is operating. I do something good and then I feel happy about it. That's when my ego is operating, which I don't observe. Is my point.
Yeah, you have to be watchful of that. It can be egoistic and it may not be egoistic. Because compassion, we are also capable of love and compassion. See, sir, if a man is coming on bicycle and suddenly falls, don't you feel like helping him? Where is the ego in that? There is no ego. The ego comes in afterwards when you feel that he should be grateful to me. I have helped him and he still is talking to me rudely and so on. So on. That expectation of getting a return from it is the ego. But otherwise, your normal response, love and compassion are part of our consciousness, put there by nature, not created by your thinking. The ego is created by thinking.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Durgaji, are you there? You can ask your question now.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Please go.
sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'm audible to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning to everybody. Sir, it's a wonderful listening to you. It's a very valuable talk with a lot of inputs from the scientific world as well. And a lot of your, inputs are a lot of your points which you have covered, they very well resonate well with me. And I really appreciate that, that fact that, you could deliver all these things and we could listen to you and all. It's very nice sharing on your part. Yes, sir. And I want to add a few more points.
I have an objection.
Yeah.
You're praising me, which boosts my ego, and I am trying to decimate my ego. So
no, sir. I think we're all human beings, sir. We're all human beings, and
Yes.
these are appreciation and all is part of it, sir. We are not transcendent beings. All those things remain with us. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
but what is your question?
Yeah, question means like I just would like to share a few insights or what your perceptions which I have had with you. Like I just want to add that growing in wisdom is a very nice way you have coined it up. I also would like to say there is nothing called complete transformation happening in a flash or something like that. I don't know, whatever case said, we don't know what we meant. But as a human being, and when you are deeply connected with the teaching, and when you also want to investigate, whatever he said in your own life, and you start connecting with him, and you start resonating with whatever the points he has covered. So I feel it is not like, the transformation is once for all kind of a thing. A learning mind is a very good point you have made, and religious mind is another good point. Of course, it's there in K teaching itself. And regarding the previous person who said, like anger when it comes, like, you shouldn't see it with your words. I feel we do recognize anger, but observing whatever that comes after when the anger is going on and all that comes in, happens in oneself without naming itself, just to find out. I think that's a good way of learning about anger in oneself. That very emotion or essence, where it is coming from. The root of it one can know. That's one point I just would like to add. And yes, sir. These are the few points I just would like to communicate, sir. It's a very good sharing.
The complication that comes from naming, as I understand it, is that word is associated in our brain with a lot of other images and concepts and so on, which are all part of our conditioning. And so the whole mess comes up. As soon as you use the word, oh, he's a Muslim, that word Muslim is associated with all kinds of images and so on. So if one can avoid that, then you can avoid this complication. But you cannot voluntarily avoid that. You have to see this truth of this also, that the word creates complication because of its association. Not only word, but also images. They create a lot. All that is part of the conditioning, and that is why Krishnaji says that you have to free yourself of the conditioning. He in fact goes to the extent of saying that learning does not even begin until you are free from your conditioning.
So just can I add just one more point here?
Yeah.
Like the previous gentleman has stated a very good point. Seeing the flowering of it. One cannot act upon one's own emotions and feelings and all. Just allow it to flower. That's how they may come to an end. He has given a very valuable input back. Yes, sir. The flowering of it. Yes,
You
sir.
are witness consciousness, not as a consciousness which is trying to alter anything.
Yes, sir. And inquiry is a very good tool, sir. We shouldn't forget. That is the only tool which can, take us far away, like whatever it is, the deeper layers of consciousness, whatever you call. And that's a very good, your tool or whatever you can say. It's from teaching, sir. Thank you for the time, sir. That's all.
We have two more questions. Prakash ji, please go ahead, and then Harish ji. Prakash ji, please. Yeah. We can't hear you.
Ask him to unmute himself.
Unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yeah, we
Now?
can hear. Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Sir, my question is, what is the difference between self-respect and ego?
Self?
Respect.
Yeah. Self-respect is a sort of evaluation which one does about oneself, and then you form an opinion about yourself. So if I have an opinion about myself that I'm a very good professor of physics and I'm very knowledgeable, and somebody makes a remark that he doesn't know much physics and he's fairly stupid, then it hurts me because I have this image about myself as a very competent professor or knowledgeable man, and that image hurts me. So one has to be a bit careful. It is part of ego that we have all these images about other people and also the image about oneself. And one has to go into it as to why we carry these images. We'll find that at the root of it is that we feel somehow that we are more secure if we keep these images with us. And he is saying that if you are a religious person, you have to be vulnerable, not seek security. You have to be vulnerable. That means you trust your friend. Don't start with suspicion and distrust. He may hurt you, and it's all right. You have to be willing to get hurt by him. And that will enable you to learn about hurt. What is hurt and why you feel hurt when somebody criticizes you and so on. So it's a different approach altogether.
Thank you,
Sir,
sir.
self-respect is totally unwanted as per Krishnamurti's teaching.
If it is coming from the ego, find out whether it is coming from the ego or it is without the ego. Everything that is without the ego is fine. Okay. You go to the temple, it is fine so long as you are not doing it egoistically and going there to beg for some favors from God. Then it's all right. It is not the action or the thought that creates the ego. It is the motive with which you are doing the action or doing that thought engaging in that thought that creates, that may be egoistic or may not be egoistic. So that is what you need to watch. किस आधार से आप शुरू कर रहे हैं, कहाँ से, from where are you starting?
Thank you, sir. I think we'll take the last question now. Harish ji, please go ahead.
नमस्कार सर।
हरीश, कैसे हो?
जी ठीक हूँ सर।
Long time.
Yes, yes.
मैं ठीक से था।
Sir, I am reminded of one phrase which Krishna ji used quite often, but I came across for the first time in 1983 when I was given Letters to the School as my third book for translation into Hindi. And one phrase that I especially liked, it is such a simple thing, and that is flowering of goodness. And of course, those letters are meant for students and the teachers. I quite see the truth of, the fallacy of psychological evolution. And of course, the antidote will be psychological revolution. So any radical transformation is, if there is such a thing, it happens now, in the immediate now, not even in the future. So I see that. But this, like a good human being, and he often talked about good human being. Is it that there can be a good human being, a humbler person, not always self-assertive or asserting one's own rights and all that? No, fairly good person. Only after that radical revolution, or no? As we see and observe ourselves more and more, like Krishnaji says, each page reading the book of life, So there is that gradual flowering of goodness. And even though we may be still aggressive, certain negative traits of our character may persist, but we lose the grip on that side.
Yes, Hariji. These are all problems, real problems of our life. As I understand it, what Krishnaji means by flowering of goodness is that feelings of love and compassion and so on are innately present in our consciousness. They get destroyed by this ego process, which produces division and hatred. Then the love goes, because hatred will dissolve it. And so the flowering stops. So ultimately, that flowering of goodness is the same thing as freedom from the ego, as I understand. If the ego and disorder is not there, it will flower. You don't make it flower. Thought will not create love. Thought will create sentiment. Sentiment is not love. So one has to be very careful, because things created by thought can appear to be very close to natural things, but they are not close. Like attachment looks like just like love, but attachment has at its core an ego, whereas love does not. So, but the person is caring for his child and looking after the child. So outwardly, in its manifestation, attachment will look just the same as love does. But it is at the motive level, whether there is a return expectation or a conscious, deliberate attempt to be good, then it is still egoistic. So Krishna says conscious goodness is not goodness. Goodness has to be natural, not conscious.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Sir, time is coming to the end. Yeah, already 5 minutes have passed. So would you please announce the lecture of the next Sunday by Gopalan sir? Would you please announce that?
Next Sunday, Rajaram Kudli. Next
Okay.
Sunday, we have Mr. Raja Ram Kudli, a former parent of the Valley School, and he will be talking about wisdom and tradition, which gives rise to Dharm Sankat, as he calls it. So he will be speaking on this subject. You are all welcome to join us. And I once again want to thank Professor Krishna for sparing his time for us. And we'll see you all next week on Sunday. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dubeyji. Thank you, Dubeyji.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Kamlesh, you can finish it.
Yes, yes, sir.